So if you have not been with us, we are still in the midst of an effort to follow the story of God's efforts to reach humanity from the beginning to the end. And we're right around halfway at this point. And the chapter in the story that we're covering today starts with Elijah and ends with Amos. And so that's this much of my Bible, roughly a third of the entire thing, although we're not literally tackling all of it. It was a little bit of a challenge to try to gather together all of the different prophets and all of their experiences into one. And I couldn't. I gave up on that. So I'm going to focus mostly on Elijah because he speaks to me. And hopefully this will speak to you a little bit too. So what we're seeing here as we get into 1 Kings, we're in chapter 16 when this part of the story picks up. And we're seeing the death spiral that began the moment that Solomon replaced God with his own legacy as king is starting to really swirl now. As we talked about last week, his son, complete disaster, tore the kingdom in two, and it was just, as we would say, the handwriting was already on the wall. So we're seeing Israel running off the rails, and God's trying to call his people back. Remember, this was something that we kind of talked about during Sunday school that's really interesting, that for so many years, God's prophet was either the leader of the country or the one that had the king's ear, sort of not really a vice president, a grand vizier of sorts, but the person who was always near the top, always speaking to the leaders. And now all of a sudden, the leaders weren't interested in hearing from God, and prophet became something that was outside the power structure, speaking in. And often they had a very tough time of it. And, we'll see why as we go along. So it starts up as the train wreck of poor kings goes along, the granddaddy of them all. We already saw the greatest king of all time. Now we see the worst of all time. And that's saying a lot in this list because Israel had some really, really bad kings. But this is where it starts in chapter 16, verse 29. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel. Remember, they were split now. So there was Judah, and then there was Israel, 2 tribes, and then the other 10. He reigned over Samaria, in Samaria over Israel for 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Ahab also made an Asherah pole and did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all of the kings of Israel before him. Yeah, one of his predecessors made new golden calves. So, this guy was really reaching for the sky. And here's what I think was the real problem. The other kings would, like Solomon, build a temple, make idols accessible. This guy really worshiped the pagan idol and didn't just allow it or encourage it. He took another step there. And of course, everybody blames Jezebel. Yes, she was probably an awful person, but again, let's not be too quick to assume that the woman was the problem here. So into this, again, thinking of Samuel, the great leader of the nation who anointed Saul and then David, thinking of Nathan, the advisor to the king, and then Elijah gets called. And because I'm a psychology guy, I'm wondering, what did he think when he felt God tugging on his heart, when he started hearing that voice saying, "You're going to be my mouthpiece"? What did he picture in his head? What did he imagine himself doing? I know what all of us who get called to be preachers imagine in our heads. Well, after we say, "God, are you sure? Because this is a bad idea." After that, we start picturing these grand sermons where people just burst out in tears and flood down the aisle and get right with God. We all imagine it. And then we become pastors and reality sets in. But anyway, I'm just saying, what did he think was going to happen? I don't think he imagined what actually did happen. I don't think he did. I don't think anybody could have guessed this. So God calls him to be his prophet. He shows up to speak to the king, and God says, here's what I want you to tell him. It's not going to rain for a long time. That's the whole sermon, God? You sure you don't want me to throw in anything else? Altar call, maybe? Yeah. That's all I want you to do. Make an announcement. It's not going to rain. And then just go hide out. Seriously. That's my job. I'm just trying to picture it. That's what I'm doing? Okay. And so he does. He makes the announcement and then goes into hiding because he's now, public enemy number one for bringing the king bad news. And it's easy to miss as the story goes on. He goes and hides out by the brook. There's a little brook that God sends him to, and he sends birds to feed him. And as a kid, I always pictured the food that the ravens brought as well-cooked chunks of steak. But you know how birds feed their young, right? It was probably more like that. But it kept him alive, and other people were dying. And then the brook started drying up. I don't know if you've ever seen a stream run dry. It's not something that just happens, right? It just gets a little smaller and a little smaller. And I think, I know I have had this feeling in my life, and I bet some of you had too. The feeling that he must have had as he's waking up each morning by the brook and thinking, this isn't going to last much longer. What's going to happen when this is just a little muddy spot? And wondering if God remembers he's there, remembers that he sent Elijah to this spot, said, this is where I want you. Have you ever felt like everything was drying up around you? And wondering if God still had something in mind? I bet he wondered. And finally, this was after the brook dried up, not before, after. God says, okay, I got a new place for you. Go and live with this woman and her son. Wonderful miracle. She's a poor woman, only has a little bit of flour and oil, but God makes it last. They're able to have bread throughout the famine. They stay alive when others die. But still, he's just like, really? I'm just kind of hanging out here, just staying alive, surviving. He had to wonder if this was really what being a prophet was all about. This is chapter 18. This is the beginning of chapter 18. After a long time, and how long did that feel to Elijah, who still hadn't gotten to do any preaching to anybody? In the third year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. Okay, now we're talking. But he's going there, and he knows that Jezebel has headed up the department of prophet hunting, and she's been trying to eliminate all the prophets of God. And in chapter 18, Elijah runs into one of Ahab's commanders, the leader who was in charge of the palace. And Obadiah pulls him off to the side, and he's like, you know what Jezebel's been up to. Well, I have hidden away some of the prophets of the Lord, some other people who stood up for the word of God. I've hidden them. I'm working on this, but we've got to be careful because, if Ahab gets mad at me, I'll die right on the spot. Just remember, I'm on your team. We're working together here. So anyway, Elijah finally gets to meet Ahab, and Ahab, of course, is like, oh, you're the one causing all the trouble, like it was his fault that it stopped raining. Yeah. And then the showdown is set into motion. I'm not going to tell the whole story, but there's some of these parts that are really worth talking about as many times as we get a chance. So the famous showdown on Mount Carmel, just one of my absolute favorite things, where Elijah's finally getting to do what I think he was imagining from the beginning, a great showdown. And he gets to face all the people up on Mount Carmel. It says all Israel was assembled. Maybe literal, maybe not. And he said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. Have you ever given a speech and nobody responded? Have you ever said something rousing and it was just really quiet? Or said something wise to your kids and they just didn't look up from their phone? You know, Elijah would be like, gotcha, brother. The people said nothing. They just looked at him. Probably checked their stone tablets to see if they had anything on the schedule. Just stared at him. It's such a small piece of the story, but that's the part that makes me go, oh. Because here he is, you know, calling out to the people as a prophet, and they're just kind of looking at him. He had to be thinking then, are you serious? What's a guy got to do? And Elijah said, I'm the only one left. He actually knew that wasn't true, but that shows where his mind was. Baal has 450 prophets. Tell you what, let's have a contest. 450 to 1. Let's put up some dead bulls and let's call down fire. Then we'll see. The God who answers is the real thing. And the people said, oh, this is a good idea. Let's find out. The people of Israel, by the way, yeah, okay, let's test it out and see which God is real. And so he let the other guys go first. All 450 of them, you know, prepare the sacrifice, and then they go nuts trying to call down fire from Baal. And of course, nothing happens. And Elijah accidentally invents trash talk right here in the Old Testament. He's like, maybe he's in the bathroom, call louder. Woo. I mean, he is having so much fun. Honestly, I would have been right beside him because, you know, watching these people doing all their stuff, thinking something's going to happen, you know, it would get a little comical. I'm with them on this one. They're like, oh, Baal, answer us. Oh, come on, be louder. Maybe he fell asleep. And I mean, so all morning and into the afternoon, and nothing happens, of course. And then he's like, okay, my turn. And what did he start with? He made a little altar with 12 stones, trying to remind the people where they come from, which they had clearly forgotten. Put the bull up, built a trench around. He's like, pour water all over this. This is not challenging enough at this point. Pour water all over the bull, cover the wood, fill the trench around it. And I mean, they just poured water and water and water. And he was like, okay, good. Fill everything. And then he called on God. And the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, burned up the wood, burned up the stones, the soil, and all the water in the trench. And suddenly the people realized who the real God was. Oh, to have been there for this. The people fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, he is God. And then Elijah got to be the prophet he had always wanted to be. Again, that's my assumption. This is my moment. To me, Israel, I'm sure he was picturing Moses and other great heroes of the past. He's like, seize those guys, put them to death right now. And it got ugly. All of the prophets of Baal were slaughtered there. And Elijah said, now the rain's coming. Now the rain is coming. And so eventually they start seeing the cloud coming, and Elijah says to Ahab, hitch up your chariot. You better get going before the road gets muddy. He took off. And listen, I love this part. The power of the Lord came upon Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel, several miles, if I remember my geography correctly, in sandals. I've read that before and just thought, can I get enough of the power of the Lord to jog around the block without dying? This guy, he's running ahead of a chariot. Those are horses, by the way, and just imagine the adrenaline and that jog. And you remember Charlie Brown when he thought he was going to win the race, and he throws his head back, and he's just like, I got this. That's the one where he runs out of the stadium instead of around to the finish line. I can just see him, almost chariots of fire, throwing the head back, and And he's imagining, this is the moment. It's finally happening. Israel is coming back. God has shown them, and he runs ahead of the chariot all the way. And they get there, and Ahab reports to Jezebel, and she's like, well, here's what's really going to happen. I'm having that guy killed. And so the next thing Elijah hears is not, the people have risen up to support you. We're driving those crazy pagans out. No, it was, there's a price on your head. They're coming to get you. And he has to get on, hitch up his cloak again, and run for his life. The highest high you can probably even imagine to the lowest of lows. And he runs into the desert, eventually goes to the mountain of God, and is just like, I've failed. I've failed. I've fallen short. I haven't been able to do the job you gave me. I was the only one trying to speak up for God, and I failed. It's all over now. And the angel came to him, said, sleep, and then brought him some food and said, okay, keep going. You still have a little bit of journey left. You have to seek God. And he finally had that conversation with God, and he's just like, just I'm ready to go home now to my ancestors, and join the rest of I'm done. I failed. I'm worthless. Nothing turned out the way it was supposed to. And he says literally, I am the only one left. Now they're trying to kill me. And that's when the Lord passes by in the gentle whisper. And he says, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he goes again into his, I'm the only one zealous for the Lord. Now I'm most wanted. And the Lord said, there are others. There are others working for me, and you still have a job to do. I've got 7,000 in Israel whose knees have not bowed down to Baal. And I have a job for you. You still have prophecies to share, and you have a successor to appoint. God picked him up and sent him back out. And that's when he calls Elisha to be his successor, who does just a laundry list of amazing miracles over many years. But we can relate to this guy, I think. We can relate to his feelings. When things don't go well, it is easy for us to start thinking, I'm just a failure. There's nothing I have to contribute. Because we get down and then the devil's right on us and wants to keep us down. It's very easy. But thinking about just that cycle of his life, the importance of praying with persistence. Anybody asked for something that God didn't just do instantly? Have you ever asked for something and it did happen instantly? I want to hear some of those stories. This was a guy who had to really stick with it and wait. So much waiting in his story. And we don't like waiting. Waiting's painful, but he did some painful waiting. But he just kept with it. And I think he knew that God was going to move, but we all have those moments. And that sense of calling, and we want to do something great, but we never know what it is God needs us to do. And the only way we get disappointed is if we decide what it should be like to serve God and follow God, and it's not like that, right? That's what causes the disconnect, is when we think something should be different. Also, this idea of what is success and what is failure. I'm sure in his mind certain things were successes and certain things were failures, and sometimes we feel the same way, but we need to remember that our perception is not always what God's thinking and what God's seeing. And particularly feeling like the only one. I think a lot of times, maybe not while we're at church, but out in the world, it is easy to feel outnumbered. Sometimes it is easy to feel like we're the only ones trying, the only ones staying faithful. And we need to remember that we are We're part of something big, but we're each just little pieces of that. Even Elijah and Elisha were just little pieces of a very big plan. But here's something that I caught this time through that I did not catch before. You know, hopefully you remember the part when Elijah has finished all of his service and he told his protege Elisha, okay, I'm going for my last journey. You can just go on and do other things. And Elisha's like, I'm not leaving you. That's not happening. I'm staying with you till the end. And so Elisha got to be there when the chariots of fire and the horses of fire came down to pick up Elijah and take him to heaven. Oh, wow. But here's the part that I don't remember from Sunday school. Maybe you guys caught it and I missed it. But later on, much later actually, in 2 Kings chapter 6, the king of, Aram, I think. I didn't write it down. Some other king realized that Elisha was the secret weapon of Israel, and that he was the one who always seemed to know where Israel's enemies were, and would tip off the king and say, oh, by the way, he's coming over here. Oh, watch out, he's doing this. And he's like, okay, we're going to find this guy, and we're getting rid of him, because he's our biggest problem, right? And so he sent this huge group of horses and chariots out and surrounded this town where he was staying. This is 2 Kings 6:15. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh no, my lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed. Sorry, I didn't expect this. Elisha prayed, open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see. And then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. Maybe he inherited that from Elijah. Maybe it was just being able to see. I don't know. But that was a guy who went through every step of his life as a prophet, seeming to be alone, but knowing the whole time that he was surrounded. You know, we have that one song about, you know, the God of angel armies is always by my side. We have the idea of protection and about God's presence, but the horses and chariots of fire, he didn't just swoop in and take Elijah home. They were constantly there, and just nobody else saw. I just think, you know, when we talk about the prophets, we tend to go straight to the big miracles. And as people who want to serve God, of course we want to do something big for God. Of course we want to make a difference for God. Who wouldn't love to make a grand proclamation and change hearts and bring people back to Christ? Who wouldn't want to change the world or accomplish world peace or whatever? But we have to remember that the heavenly version of great is probably different from the earthly version of great. You think, maybe? I think the things that we think are small are not really very small. I think things like making a person feel welcome when they walk into church is big. I don't have any proof of this, but I think that's something that causes celebration in heaven. We know that when someone accepts Christ as Savior, that sets off all kinds of parties. I think there's celebration when the little steps happen. Welcoming someone, handing somebody a blessing bag and letting them know that they're cared for, giving somebody a shoebox filled with love from the other side of the world. Those are small things, humanly speaking. But if they can change the course of a life, open a heart, give an opportunity to hear the word, it sounds kind of big. In fact, some of you know, hopefully everybody, but you know, we are part of a group that supports the elementary school and the teachers there. And every couple of weeks, We get requests from different teachers, and we take them things like shades so that the fluorescent lights don't hurt their eyes, or Play-Doh for the kindergarten class, little things. Just before Christmas, one of the teachers said, well, we have iPads for certain lessons, and then some kids finish things and want to do something quietly on their own, and not everybody owns their own earbuds. Not everybody can afford those. Not everybody has them. So it was not a mighty heroic act. A couple of clicks on Amazon, I get a box of earbuds, I deliver them to a teacher. And look at this. I hope you can tell look at these pages. Every one of these is a thank you note from a kid who saw that the churches in their area care about them and helped them in a practical way. Every one of these. And the top one is a note from the teacher. It was so small, but so big. And who knows what might come of that? Who knows what that might do in the life of the teacher? What comments she makes about those church people? What happens when we come by and bring them Chick-fil-A nuggets? Yeah, you want to be a hero? Show up in the teacher's lounge with Chick-fil-A nuggets. I'm getting an amen from Bethany back there. Simple and practical things, not huge, but powerful. I was at a conference in Tampa, and I was sitting with a bunch of my colleagues, and we had gone to this little place by the water to get some food and talk through everything we had seen that day. And our waitress was she was very grim and very short and terse. And I mean, everybody's like, boy, she's a winner. Oh, just kind of that kind of stuff. And about the third time she came by, I was just like, are you okay? Because you just seem really stressed out. And she tells us about how the kitchen is driving her crazy and everybody's mad at her because the food's late, which isn't her fault. If you've waited tables, you know this story. I was like, look, some of us have waited tables. We know how it goes. You need us to go in the kitchen with you and back you up? I was serious. She's like, no. But she smiled and was a different person the rest of the night. I didn't go full dad on her. I wanted her to give her the whole, you can only control yourself, but just that. It may not have made a huge difference, but she smiled instead of was grim the rest of the day. And the next day she might have been like, man, who knows? And I'm not like saying I'm the greatest in the world. I'm just saying just a little thing. And who knows what God may do with that. And we all have chances to do little things like that all the time, especially when you at the drive-thru. You know how stressed out drive-thru people get? Because it's always their fault. Be nice to somebody at the drive-thru. Give them a tip and watch their eyes bug out. You see what I'm saying? Little things like that. That's giving God an opening to do something amazing with just something very small. And I think we can do that anytime, all the time. All we have to do is be us. That's the real amazing thing. We're all built to do certain things for the kingdom. We have certain passions. We have certain gifts. Go be you. Just be you. It doesn't have to be stadiums full of people. It can be just one. You might do something that nobody actually sees, and it could still make a difference. That's how the kingdom works. Just be you. Be who God made you to be. Carry that out faithfully, and let him take care of the rest. And also, don't forget, because I know sometimes we're struggling along and feeling like we're not getting anywhere, not accomplishing anything. Elijah. But don't miss this. He struggled. He didn't get to do what he thought his job was. He didn't get to change everything. He waited years thinking he was just holding on and barely surviving, watching the stream dry up, wondering if the flour and the oil would last. He felt like a failure. He felt like he completely blew it, but his mistake was thinking it was all about just him. He kept saying, I'm the only one. It's just me. I'm fighting by myself here. And God had to bring him back. And don't miss this. When you're down in those dumps, eat something. eat something, rest, and then seek God and hear. And you notice how the angel came first and got him physically back where he could kind of hold on? And then God's like, okay, let's get away from the part that you consider a failure and let's move on, because you still have a job to do. And here's the thing. Elijah, one of the greatest of all time, one of the ones that walked around with Jesus before the last days, he needed to go through this to get ready for his next job. He needed to have these linchpins in his life, the triumph on Carmel, and also knowing that God wasn't going to leave him by a drying up brook. But those points where he could say, look, I've been where I thought God had forgotten me before, and I found out I was wrong. He's come through for me before. I've seen it with my own eyes. I'm not going to doubt again. And we have to be able to go back to the things we know to be true to keep us going so that we can refocus and be who God called us to be. So and I have to go back to those chariots. How about just every day when you walk outside, we can pray for our eyes to be opened, because that would be amazing. But we'll just settle for this. Just picture the horses and chariots of fire on either side, ahead of you, behind you. Wherever you go, no matter how many people, if you're all alone or there's a crowd, you are surrounded by a mighty host. Elisha was never alarmed for himself, never worried, because he could see them. But if we can just keep that as in our minds, when we go out as servants of Christ, we never go alone. We're going to close with our hymn of commitment today. Speak to me that I may speak. Number 568. Let's stand and sing together. So all your chariots and horses are waiting outside to escort you home. Let's go forth as people not trying to be something we're not, just trying to be the people God made us. And that's going to be great. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.